Now back to the show. This is You and the Law with Sterling Fox on AM 650.
Welcome back. On this edition of You and the Law, I'm joined in studio by Joe Murphy and Joe Battista from the law firm Murphy Battista LLP. As we move forward with the conversation, gentlemen, a couple of things, a couple of terms that I'd like to throw into the mix. Lawyers talk a lot about fiduciary duties. And then I want to talk about people with disabilities, and I suspect the two are linked. So, Joe Battista, why don't we start off? What do you mean by fiduciary duties? What is that?
A fiduciary duty arises out of a special relationship between two parties. For example, an executor of an estate has a fiduciary duty to the beneficiaries to administer the estate and to pay out the estate property to the beneficiaries.
Right.
There's a fiduciary duty that arises, I think, between a lawyer and their client based on the special relationship. And Joe can elaborate more on this, but in a nutshell, the fiduciary duty requires the trustee, the person who has the duty, to exercise his or her judgment in the best interest of the beneficiary of that duty.
So in a lawyer case, the lawyer would be the trustee who has an obligation to act in the best interest of his or her client.
Exactly.
Okay.
And I think Joe can elaborate on how that might arise in the lawyer-client context.
Okay, my misunderstanding of the term, I guess, Joe Murphy, is the fact that I always thought it was a financial thing. I always thought it was about money, and that's not necessarily the case at all, is it?
Fiduciary usually relates to money, but it doesn't necessarily have to. And the fiduciary relationship is one person is in charge, and the second person is dependent on the other person to do the right thing for them.
Okay. All right.
So you could, common situation, the client says to the lawyer, I've got a problem, I need your help. And the lawyer is there then to sort of guide the client through to a solution. In business situations where someone's appointed to negotiate for a company, that's likely a fiduciary relationship. But it really is someone who's dependent on another person to be taken care of, to have their interests taken care of. And when you get the interests conflicting, that's when the problems arise.
Okay, so give an example of how this might play out in a negative way, where someone would be challenged for not performing their fiduciary duty.
Well, I'll give you an example, and it comes from a real-life case. It involves an injury to a young child, and the child's family hires a lawyer who, of course, they're reliant on because they have no idea how the whole system works.
Of course.
The lawyer says to the parents, well, we need to go to court on this and have the damages set. And the trial is set for when the child is still young, and the injury was a brain injury. And the parents questioned, well, why so early? And they said, this is a good idea. This is a good time to do it. And then as the trial date came along, as it was getting closer and closer, the lawyer said, well, we need to mediate this claim, which is a settlement meeting over the course of a day.
It's an out-of-court arrangement,
and again,
right?
The parents thought, well, this is the way it goes.
Right.
And then the lawyer intentionally failed to develop the evidence on a certain point that was a potential problem, and in mediation, the case was settled for a much lower amount because of this issue that the lawyer had intentionally never dealt with. So this was a family who was totally reliant on the lawyer to be taken care of, to be guided, and it's a lawyer who failed to do so in a number of different ways.
So now that person, and I would imagine a no-nonsense law firm like Murphy Battista, Joe Battista, gets more than a few calls from families and concerned parties who have been underserved by other lawyers. Is that, I'm trying to be diplomatic here. Is that okay?
We get calls from people who want to switch lawyers. We also get calls from people who just want a second opinion. They don't necessarily disagree with the advice, but they just want the comfort of a second opinion.
Fair enough, yeah.
And we provide both services
Okay.
to people if they want
Okay, now Joe Murphy, back to that story that you just illustrated where the lawyer encouraged the family to resolve the matter quickly. A young child with a brain injury. Did the family balk at the last minute and not settle and come to you?
No.
Or did they settle and then come to you afterwards going, oh, we think we've made a big mistake?
My involvement was neither of those, but it was a family who inherently trusted the lawyer to do what was best for them and the child.
Okay.
And as a result, the case was settled. And what I believe will be an amount when this young child becomes an adult that will be very, very inadequate.
Right.
But the key is the lawyer had the control. The family was totally reliant and dependent on the lawyer, and the lawyer's actions weren't, as it turns out, for the best interest of the child.
So now, is there any culpability on the part of the lawyer who's making arrangements to suit his agenda rather than the client's, and particularly this little kid who's badly damaged? Is there any recourse the family would have to go back and go, wait a second, we've really been poorly served here. We may have made a big mistake. Or is it a done deal once they accept that settlement?
It's probably a done deal. But the key is, of course, if the family trusts and relies on the lawyer,
right,
they walk away at the end of the day thinking that this was a reasonable outcome. And in fact, they might think the lawyer did a great job for getting this case settled at this point in time for this much money because they just don't know any better.
Right. So then, Joe Battista, this is when some people at least, call up your firm going, I've just been counseled by my lawyer to proceed in this fashion based on this case. Am I doing the right thing? Is that what they just call and just go, am I making a mistake here, or am I being given good advice?
Well, you have to realize the lawyer has had conduct of the file for many years,
course, yeah.
has all the information. We have to be very careful not to second guess that lawyer's advice without looking at the file and looking at least some medical reports and understanding the issues, because you settle for all sorts of reasons. You settle for perhaps a tough liability case. There might be something in the case that, if it comes to light, is not going to be favorable, and you don't always know that. So you have to be very careful when you give a second opinion, and you want to make sure that you've got all the information and that you're not just guessing at it. So if it's a significant case, we have actually got the lawyer's file and looked at it ourselves and given a second opinion. And sometimes if our own clients have second thoughts, we encourage them to talk to someone else. We don't know it all, and it never hurts. And hopefully that second opinion bears out your advice. And if it doesn't, if you've missed the boat for some reason, then ultimately you still want the client to be served as best they can. And so,
Sterling, I want to add something that I think puts it in perspective. It is a rare situation where a lawyer serves himself or herself rather than serving the client.
Okay, it does happen, but it's more.
But in the business that we're in, what people should look at but don't because they don't know how to do it is, if you're hiring a lawyer on an injury case, the question to ask this lawyer is, how often do you go to trial? Because there are some lawyers in our business who never go to trial. They always settle. So if that's the case and the insurance company knows it, they track the lawyers.
Of course they do.
Then the case is never going to settle, or almost never going to settle for what it should, because the insurance company knows that they can just say, that's it, that's all the money, and the lawyer will take it.
So again, another valuable take-away point from this episode of You and the Law. If you are injured, and if there is a settlement that is arranged for, you always have counseled, don't be too hasty to accept a settlement. But again, just you've got to ask questions. You've just got to ask questions about all of the details. But, we don't know the law. We count on our lawyers to walk us through that minefield. The language is even different, for crying out loud. So we've just got to be a little less trusting. Is that what you're suggesting here? Perhaps a little cynicism is healthy at certain times?
Well, I think people have to be careful when they hire a lawyer that they're hiring the right lawyer.
So if you got to ask, if you ask, This is an important question. If you're interviewing a lawyer for an injury case, you should ask that person whether he or she goes to court, correct?
Yes, and you should ask for the names of some of the cases they've done in the last few years.
Yeah, your website, for example, has cases, the cases you've fought and won, and all the rest of it's right there on the website, right?
Sterling, when people hire lawyers to act for them in injury cases, they expect there's going to be a fight with the insurance company.
Yes.
And there usually is.
Yeah.
Big fights, little fights. But if they're hiring a gunslinger who has no bullets, never went to court, they're not hiring the right person.
Right.
And that's really what it is. They need a gunslinger, and if the person never goes to court, essentially they're a gunslinger with no bullets.
And the insurance company will know it and
Yes.
make it much easier to push that person around.
Yes. Well, the lawyer will obviously say to the client, we've got to settle your case for whatever the reasons are. But if the lawyer never goes to court, it really colors their advice, and it colors how they handle the claim.
Excellent legal advice here, friends, on You and the Law here on AM 650. Ask the lawyer if he or he goes to court. And check them out. Do a little Google searching of your own. It's important information, really important details. Lots more ahead with Joe Murphy and Joe Battista from Murphy Battista LLP in Vancouver right after this.
This is You and the Law. There's more of the show still ahead on AM 650.